All right, so we've already talked quite a bit in this course about the importance of close and critical reading, which is a skill that you are going to need to have in order to complete assignment 1. Another skill that's going to be really important, which some of you may be really familiar with, some of you maybe not so much, is quoting and paraphrasing correctly. As we've seen when we talked about the syllabus, when we went over academic integrity, citing correctly in college writing becomes very, very important, almost in a different way than it does with other types of writing tasks. So I would like to take this time to go over some of the basic conventions of quoting and paraphrasing, and eventually we will get into more complicated ways of citing, but we're going to start with just quoting and paraphrasing here. So it might be a good idea for you to jot down a few notes as you go, just so you have them for reference later on when it comes time to write the assignment. Starting with quoting. So quoting, obviously, is inserting another writer's exact words into your own writing. An example would be in his essay, The Unsettling of America, Wendell Berry writes that once plants and animals were raised together on the same farm, which therefore neither produced unmanageable surpluses of manure nor depended on such quantities of commercial fertilizer. This is from your reader. As you can see, it's the exact words of the author, and you also have an author tag here. In his essay, Wendell Berry writes. So that's something you want to be paying attention to when you're summarizing, is that you're not just dropping quotes, but you're also putting an author tag there so that your audience has a sense of where that quote is coming from. In writing, you want to quote when you want to capture the writer's tone or the writer has said something particularly memorable. So whereas with paraphrasing, you're using the writer's ideas, you might quote when you find a quote where you want to use that idea, but you also really, really like the way the author has articulated it, okay? When using quotes, you want to make sure you contextualize your ideas, so you're not just dropping that quote right into the mix, which is something I see all the time. And obviously, I wouldn't be going over it if it weren't something that I see a lot. So dropping those quotes right in there and moving on is not going to give your audience a sense of what you are trying to say about that quote, right? So you want to start with some sort of lead-in. We saw that in the last quote in his essay, Wendell Berry writes. So there's some sort of context for where that quote is coming from. You obviously have your quote in the middle, kind of like a sandwich, and then you follow up with some sort of statement. So one thing that I see is a lot of times students will have the lead-in part, but they won't have a follow-up statement. So they'll introduce the quote, they'll have the quote, and then they'll move on to a point that is entirely unrelated. You want to make sure it's clear to your audience why you're using the ideas that you're using, so that you're connecting whatever quote or evidence you use to the next idea. Otherwise, your audience just isn't going to get it, and it's just going to feel like a quote bomb, which is something I see a lot, and something that you want to try to avoid. So please, no quote bombs. So we're going to move on now to paraphrasing. With paraphrasing, you are, and paraphrasing is a little bit trickier than it might seem. Quoting is pretty straightforward. Paraphrasing is a little bit of a different story. With paraphrasing, you are translating another author's language into your own language, voice, and style. It converts the original writer's voice into your own voice, and you want to be careful to avoid the original writer's words and the original writer's grammatical structure and syntax. What that means is when I was young, and I was, say, in middle school, and I wanted to paraphrase something, I would take the exact quote, and I would maybe take out a few words and switch them around, and I would call that paraphrasing. Because I was in middle schoal, right? This is the way that we paraphrase at a lower level of writing. In college, you want to make sure, with academic writing and rhetorical writing specifically, you want to make sure that when you are paraphrasing, you're not only changing the words, but you're changing the sentence structure, you're changing the syntax, you're changing the wording around, so it doesn't sound like you're just kind of mimicking the author's style, because if you do that, you make yourself vulnerable to accusations of academic of plagiarism. So you want to be really careful. So for instance, if the original quote or the national food policy is not simply about food, it's about health, it's about rural landscapes, it's about the environment, it's about education, it's about poverty. My instinct might be to write something like, the national food policy is not just about the way we eat, it's about our health, it's about poverty, it's about the climate, it's about schooling, it's about rural landscapes. If I were to do that, that would be considered plagiarism, because I'm, in a lot of ways, even though I'm changing some things, I'm still mimicking the syntax here, right? A more effective way to paraphrase would be, Bittman et al. Makes the point that a national food policy is beneficial to many unexpected aspects of society, including economic inequity, health, and the environment. So in that case, I'm actually really changing things around, and it becomes my own words. You will see, though, that I still use an author tag, okay? Even when I'm paraphrasing, I'm always attributing at the sentence level to the author, okay? When you're writing a paraphrase, you want to be more careful than when you're quoting, because there's a lot more involved. So you want to make sure you're reading the original carefully so that you're not mischaracterizing an author's words. So really make sure you know what is being said first. I've definitely seen students in the past use different types of evidence out of context and not really quite using it the way it's meant to be used, right? So once you do that, you want to substitute words, rearrange sentences, and ask yourself if you're still paraphrasing its exact meaning. In summary, we paraphrase when it's the idea and not the tone or exact wording that you're trying to get across. Okay? So we talked about quoting, we talked about summary, or we talked about paraphrasing. The last thing I want to talk about is something I've already hit on, which is author tags. You need to use, and this is a huge part of summarizing correctly, you need to use author tags anytime you're borrowing someone else's ideas. Because you are doing this in summary all the time. So every idea is the author's idea. Summary, you're just saying what's there. You're not bringing in your own ideas. You will do that later on in the semester. But for summary, you're really just bringing in the other person's ideas. Because you're doing that all the time, it's important that you attribute accordingly. So I've had students ask me, okay, does that mean that I need to put an author tag in every sentence that I write in my summary? And my answer is yes. For this kind of summary, if you start just using the author's words without using an author tag, it's going to end up sounding like they're your own ideas, which they're not, because you're summarizing. So in his essay, The Unsettling of America, Wendell Berry writes that. Bittman et al. Makes the point that. So always attributing each sentence, each idea to the author. Okay, and we'll take a look at what this looks like in class just to make sure we're all on the same page. Last bit, in a summary, author tags can get repetitive. Bittman says, Bittman says, Bittman says, Bittman says. So once you've gotten the hang of using author tags repeatedly, you want to think about how you could switch things up and use some variety in the author tags, such as the author then points out, or he cites a study in which. I've posted a list of author tags on Canvas under materials, I think week 2 materials and modules. So that should be available to you if you're having a hard time changing up your author tags. But those are just some things to be aware of. Author tags often drop off the map when it comes time to write the summary, and that does have an effect on your grade, because it then looks like you are not summarizing, but you're going back and forth between the author's ideas and your own. So something to be very, very aware of. We're going to hit on this. We're going to review all of these ideas briefly in class on Tuesday. But I do want to make sure we're all on the same page with these types of conventions. So really make sure you feel comfortable with this. And if you have any questions or concerns, bring them to me in class on Tuesday. All right, thank you. We'll see you then.